Welcome to the Open Adoption Project. We're the Nelsons. I'm Sean, and in today's episode, my wife Lynette will interview Tamra, who is a birth mother. I think that you're really going to enjoy this episode. Tamra is such a unique and just awesome individual. Tamra placed her son Justin for adoption about 20 years ago in the era when closed adoptions were coming to an end and open adoptions were starting to become a thing. In today's episode, she'll share her story along with some advice for expected parents and others involved in the adoption triad. Tamra is a minimalist and she is nomadic. She lives in a converted short bus and has really been nomadic for about the last 6 years. She has worked extensively in wilderness therapy, helping young adults and adolescents that are in crisis. And she has been on 4 survival type TV shows. So awesome, really unique, really just genuine person who opens up and shares so much from her heart. And I think that all members of the Adoption Triad will really benefit from what she has to share with us in this episode. In the beginning of the episode, the audio is just a little rough. There was a poor connection, but it does get a lot better just a few minutes in. So we hope you enjoy this episode with Tamra.
Okay, we are now on with Tamra. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for being here with us. To start off, we're hoping that you can share your adoption story.
So for me, telling my adoption story is like a 4-hour affair, but I'll try to I'll try to make it a little bit more concise. So the basic timeline. I was 17 years old when I got pregnant, and I was 18 when I placed my son for adoption. Through most of my pregnancy, I was not on board with the option of adoption. I got engaged initially, and then kind of was trying to figure out how to single parent. And through some pretty dramatic divine intervention, came to the answer that I had to place my child for adoption. And then through more miraculous divine intervention, was led to a particular family. And so I placed him for adoption in May of 1996. And at the time, most adoptions were closed. We were just starting to evolve. We were just like, it was right around the corner. And there were certain things about our arrangement that felt really progressive at the time and felt really liberal at the time. But in hindsight, from the perspective I have now, it looks barbaric to me, but at the time I was like, wow, I get to meet them one time, like I get to send a letter every year. So I was, obviously able to select the family, and I was able to meet them once before I gave birth. And then we had limited correspondence that kind of weaned off throughout the first year, and then like once a year through age 5, and then total drop off of correspondence, which is awful. And but then within a week of his 17th birthday, through a series of miracles, we came in contact with each other again. And so we've been in reunion for 8 years.
What were your initial thoughts and feelings as you were considering adoption for your son? You said that you weren't really on board at first, so can you just share how that kind of happened?
My initial thoughts about adoption were absolute terror and anguish. And that's appropriate. I just thought, well, first of all, just logically, I thought, well, no, that's an option for people who would make bad parents and who are bad people. I thought, but that's not me. But also then emotionally, I'm like, but that would kill me also. So who wants to do that? Who wants to be separated from the flesh of their flesh and the bone of their bone? Not me. And so I really was just doing this, this hustle to try and make it not the right answer, and to make any other answer the right answer. And that was not wasted energy. That was not wasted effort. Once I discovered I was pregnant, I was determined to get myself right. Unfortunately, up until that time, it didn't really matter if I was okay or not. I just didn't hold much value for myself. And so my choices didn't matter because they really just affected me. But once I was pregnant, it mattered. Like, it mattered more than anything ever had. And it was the drive and the motivation that I had lacked, to make changes or to make better choices, or to, to live more congruent with what I felt was right. And so the effort started immediately, of kind of this transformation and growth. And it only got so far. It was a spiritual journey for sure. I knew that I was in over my head. I knew that I was good at making poor choices, and that was no longer acceptable. That was, when it was only me who would be affected, that was one thing, but now it wasn't okay to mess this up. I had to get an answer. And I knew that I had limited experience, limited wisdom, limited perspective. I don't know the future. I don't know what's behind door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. If I choose adoption, will the family be perfect, or will they misrepresent and be horrible, or will something tragic happen? Or if I place for adoption, what if I meet the man of my dreams 6 months later? All these factors, all these unknowns. So I knew I needed to petition to a source of more information and wisdom than I had access to. And so I went to the foundation of faith that I'd always had, though it had been neglected for a long time. And in this process, I was definitely asking for, quote, an answer. I was asking God for direction. But in this process, it was a lot of begging and bargaining. It was a lot of I'll do, tell me what to do, but here's what it should be. And let me tell you why. And so I'm explaining to God, did you consider this though? And really just pleading my case, which you don't, what I discovered is answers don't really come that way when I'm trying to give the answer to God. And so God's like, okay, well, it looks like you got it figured out, and one day, kind of just in frustration, having not received the quote answer, I was just talking to God, and I threw a little bit of a temper tantrum. I was like, yo, I'm on a timeline here. And I knew I needed that peace of mind, that I couldn't produce within myself. And it wasn't coming, and I was frustrated, and I'm like, I'm doing everything. I'm doing all the right things. What more is it going to take? And probably the clearest spiritual communication I've ever received in my life came to me while I'm in that conversation with God. And it said, Tamra, surrender your will. And I could see at that moment that I hadn't. And I thought I was being really flexible and open-minded, because I was willing to do any of the things besides placing for adoption, to get married or to be a single parent. But I realized that to say, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, as long as it's not that's not the system. It doesn't work that way. And so when the equation became nothing but what is best for my son, the answer was immediately clear to me. When I eliminated myself from the equation, which is extremely difficult to do, particularly in the adolescent brain. But when I subtracted Tamra, the math was easy. The math was clear. And so, at that point I surrendered. What happens to me? And my belief at the time was, well, he'll have a family. They'll have the child they've prayed for, and I'll be left by the wayside, and I'll never be okay. I'll never be okay again. That's what I thought that answer meant. But there was peace in it somehow, because it meant he would have what I couldn't provide, which people get really confused about what that means. For me, that was not money or material resources, though yes, that as well. But it was maturity, experience, stability that I lacked. I was coming from a whole lot of stuff that it's taken a whole lot of years, to get ahead of. And I could have done it. That's another misconception. And people be like, you just knew you couldn't do it. And that rubs me so wrong, because I could have, and I could have done it better than a lot of people do, frankly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't my thinking. And that strong impression that I had was that good enough wasn't good enough. you know. I didn't want it to just be okay and like just getting by. If there was that available to him, how could I not make that available to him? And so the answer was, it came with such peace and clarity. That feeling of fear and anxiety and anguish that I had every time I thought about adoption really lifted. And I felt just complete confidence for the first time through this whole experience. I felt that reassurance and that confidence. Like, I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know how it would be, but I knew that God had us. And that felt good enough. That felt like enough. And I rested on that and rested in that. And so, yeah, so that kind of answers that question.
So, what were the reactions of your friends and family when you told them that you were thinking about adoption?
Well, when you're 17 and pregnant, everybody's got the answer. Everybody knows what you should do. Everybody's got advice. And there were definitely people in my world who were like, you're not actually thinking of having this baby. And there were definitely people in my life who were like, you're not actually thinking of parenting. Like like you have to place this child for adoption. And there were definitely people in my life that were like, don't you dare place this baby for adoption. So there was, people talk a lot about coercion and adoption, and it happens from every angle, honestly. And I take 100% ownership of the choice that I made, but it does not mean that I did not experience coercion. I 100% did, even in the direction that I ended up going. But my decision was not a result of that coercion. So, my mom was definitely pushing me towards adoption, and which the thing is, I don't know how she hadn't figured out by then that I could not even look at what she was pushing me towards. So I actually relocated. I went and lived it was the very end of the era of going away. And I wasn't going away to keep a secret, because I've always been a full disclosure, transparent kind of person. I mean, I announced it in Sunday school, for crying out loud. But there was a host family in Atlanta that my caseworker, let me give a little bit of backstory there. So my mom immediately had me in touch with an agency affiliated with our church. And they were 9 hours away in Atlanta, and I was in Memphis. So so my mom was in touch with these people. I had talked to this caseworker, but like they came to town and met me at the church, and they showed me this video, and there was this horrific image in this promotion video promoting the option of adoption, this image that haunts me to this day, of this girl being wheeled down the hospital corridor with her arms empty and looking back. And I wept for hours after I watched that. I wept for hours, and I was like, no, never, like never. And anyway, so then I got engaged, which was really a way to just defer consequences, which is what the adolescent brain really likes to do. Like, I'm, answering the question of, my child needs a father, I'll just get married to this dude. And so my mom said, okay, well, you need to let that caseworker know. And so I'm like, fine. So I called the caseworker and I said, hey, just so you know, like, I've made my decision. I won't be requiring your services. Thanks, but no thanks. And she said, okay, well, Tamra, I have a challenge for you. She said, I have an opportunity for you and a challenge for you. She said, there's a host family in Atlanta that will take you into your home. If you can get away from your boyfriend and from your parents and your family and all the pressures of people who have a stake in it, and get some distance, things might look differently. And you might have a little bit of clarity in that place, away from all the tension and the stress of these relationships. And I was like, no, in my mind, I'm like, I already know the path I'm on. I know what you want me to do. I'm not going to do it, But she said, but don't answer me right now. These are the thoughts I'm thinking. She says, don't answer me right now. She said, hang up the phone, go talk to God, and ask if you should come to Atlanta, and then call me back. Will you do that? She says. So, and I couldn't come up with a good reason not to. So I said yes, and I'm a person of my word. So I hung up the phone, and I said the cheesiest little prayer of my life, like, dear God, like, you want me to go to Atlanta or what, And this answer was not like, I don't even know what it wasn't anything. It wasn't anything, but for whatever reason, I called her up and I said, okay, which I still can't explain to this day. Like, there was no impression. There was no, like, I just said, okay. And that was really defining. That made all the difference, was exactly what she said, getting the distance from my situation and from all these people who had such high stakes such investment in my decision, and who, with the best intentions, perhaps, were going about things in a wrong way. And just the coercion was really a hindrance to me coming to my conclusion, coming to my answer. And then especially getting the distance from my boyfriend. We were in a desperately codependent relationship. I mean, my issues come from, all the issues, the main issues from my childhood come from my relationship with my father. And, here was a male who wanted me around, and, that was too much to say no to, even though I knew the relationship wasn't good. But so when I was in Atlanta, the work that I'd been doing on myself started to really take hold and started to kind of exponentially accelerate. But at the time, we didn't have cell phones. It was like 95, 96, and long distance costed money. And I was a high school dropout at this point, and he was in art school, and we didn't have the money to talk to each other very often. So our conversations were few and far between. And I absolutely had withdrawals for his attention and for those conversations. But I noticed that, and there was so much space between, though, that I noticed that on the days that we would talk, that I would regress significantly in all the ground I'd gained. I would be weak, I would be confused, I would lose my footing, I would lose ground. And so it didn't take that long for me to recognize, oh, I've told myself a lie. I've said that this is giving my son the best, that the best thing I can do for my son is to give him this father and to give him this mother that I would have been, with this guy. It's not to say he's a terrible person at all, but it was a terrible relationship. So I broke that off, but still was not prepared to really look at the idea of adoption, even though I was giving lip service to it, because I knew I was supposed to, to look at all my options and to really be open-minded and evaluate everything. So my boyfriend wanted to get married. My mom wanted me to place for adoption. My father wasn't speaking to me. Some friends wanted me to abort. Some friends were like, oh, it's going to be so fun to be a mom, so everything. But when I chose adoption, people didn't give a lot of reactions then. The host family I lived with also really wanted me to choose adoption, but it wasn't that same kind of invested pressure that I was getting at home. But the experiences, most of the opinions that have come my way about my choice have come to me since then, over the many years of being a birth mom. And I was quiet about it for the first couple or 3 years. And I just kind of gradually came all the way out of the adoption closet. And now it's something I absolutely wear on my sleeve, and it comes up organically. I don't skirt it whatsoever. And so I have gotten a lot of different reactions. Friends and family have been totally supportive, even if initially not really knowing what to do with my grief. But have been supportive of the choice, at least, feel like I did the right thing and made the right choice, which is great. Again, it's not why I did it, but it helps. But strangers, on the other hand, have the whole gamut, you know what I mean? People who I've encountered have said all of the things, but usually beautiful and supportive things, even if unenlightened.
So what was placement like for you? You said it was not very traditional, or not what we think of it as now, where you place baby in adoptive mom's arms.
Yeah. Placement is the hardest part of the story, right? For every birth mom. The whole story's hard. But going back to that place, for a birth mom to go back to that place in her mind is really the thing is, it's heaven to me. The time we spent together before placement was the most divine experience of my life, and the holiest experience of my life. And I was sustained with this peace from outside of myself to sign those papers, the wording of which is so final and so harsh. And then somehow was able to dress that baby and kiss him goodbye. And unfortunately, at the time, we had not evolved to the point of enlightenment where I was able to put him in his mother's arms, which now I know I should have just insisted that and just held that signature hostage, I really wish I would have. But so we spent 2 holy days in that hospital room, and it was absolute hallowed ground. It was a temple. And I was more myself than I've ever been. I'm just more fulfilled than I've ever been. And just more joy and peace and love than I'd ever experienced. I never knew love until I met him. I was completely juvenile in what I thought love was until I saw his face. And so there was this power that sustained me to sign those papers, and then to dress him and kiss him goodbye and hand him to a couple of strangers. And that's not right. I wish in hindsight I would have insisted on putting him in his mother's arms. I think it would have been to their benefit as well as to his benefit, to really just see and feel and experience the sacredness of that transaction. But instead, a couple of dudes I didn't even know. And then just hoping they know how to work the car seat right. And then he's gone. And I think I envisioned in my mind, wondering how this would go. Initially, I kind of thought, like, when I would envision the scene, I thought it was going to be like this weeping and wailing situation, because I was a very theatrical teen. And I think I put that on for a second. Like, I kind of tried to like emote really dramatically for a second, and it just didn't fit the actual energy in the room or the feeling. And I just kind of like relaxed into like this peace. However, when I left the hospital and went home, that peace gave way to the natural circumstances, which was I had just lost a child. And for a very long time, I felt like I couldn't breathe. There was at least one time I couldn't walk. My sister had to like carry me down the hallway because the grief was so intense. And that's not something that ever goes away. That's not something that, you don't ever really, people would talk about moving on, getting over it. That's not a thing. Like, that's not a thing. Have I experienced healing? 100%, but the loss will never cease to be a loss. But like any loss, our life starts to fill back with other things. It finds its place in proportion and perspective in our heart. But it has never stopped. It's never stopped hurting, and it's never stopped being a loss. And it's really interesting, like the things that will trigger that grief again. And there have been a few experiences that have brought me back to day one, where I didn't think I could feel it that intensely anymore, but to where I could actually feel the hollow, in my womb. And I could actually feel the aching in my arms. And I could, remember like viscerally and physically the longing. Not often, but I think that's going to continue to come back like randomly to get triggered throughout my life. And I don't mind it. It has a purpose. It plays a role, and it means my heart is still on. So my expectations have shifted. I no longer have a timeline or feel frustrated or disappointed or judgment, about the process. I see a lot of wisdom in what my body and my psyche and my heart and my spirit and my mind present me with and invite me to experience. So
what advice would you give to expectant parents as they make plans for relinquishment?
So many things. Well, I can talk about my own regrets, but not everybody feels the same way I do. But I wish that I would have taken the opportunity to nurse him. I wish I would have taken the opportunity to bring him home to meet my family. I wish I would have had the confidence and like presence of mind and trust in my own judgment to demand face-to-face placement. And I wish that I would have demanded my information be given to them. It's rather than having this third party kind of arbitrarily one size fits all play God essentially, and decide for everyone. I wish I would have stood up against that, but I didn't have the perspective I do not. Anyway, but that's not relevant to what people are experiencing these days. So I would say just make sure that the decisions that you're making about to place or not and about how to go about it are decisions that you feel personally convicted of, and that you're not handing over any of that autonomy or any of that decision making to anyone else, and trust your intuition. That is your stewardship and your assignment, and you are qualified for it. Trust your own knowing, and have the confidence to stand your ground in your own knowing. I would say know that you have no frame of reference for the loss that you're about to experience. You think you like, I was like, okay, it's going to be painful. I understand pain. But this was just a whole different realm of pain that I expanded into. And likewise, there's nothing that can prepare you for the amount of just love you're going to experience as well, and the bond and connection, at least from my experience. And so just be prepared to not be prepared emotionally. But also, I would say, know that you can. No one should ever make their decision based on fear or a feeling of inadequacy, whatever decision it is. I didn't place for adoption because I felt I couldn't parent. I could. No one should not place for adoption because they think they're not strong enough, or out of fear. And really identify where the fears are and challenge them and confront them, and put them in their proper place, and move forward in courage and faith and in confidence in your own ability, because the love of a mother is an incredibly empowering factor. And the doctor who delivered him came and stood in the doorway and observed me holding him and singing to him and just smiling at him. And I didn't notice him at first, and then he spoke and he said, "You're not going to go through with it." He saw how much I loved this baby, and he thought that that would prohibit me from being able to place him. But I knew, even in that moment, that what he didn't understand was that it was because I loved Justin so much, that empowered me to do the impossible, to defy my own instinct, to break my own heart. I mean, mothers can lift cars off of, like lift cars to save their kids. And so just have confidence in your own capacity and ability to do whatever your intuition leads you to. Other advice approaching, if you can, just have a support system. And particularly, I would say, reach out to an adoption community, or create one if it doesn't exist. Find one online, preferably in person. And particularly to connect with other birth parents. Though be selective, because there's all kinds of different viewpoints, and specific like social media groups all seem to kind of become one or the other kind of echo chamber. And so just be mindful that we can hear one brand of experience and think that's everything, or another one and think that's everybody's experience and that's the expectation, but really it's incredibly diverse, and leave space for you to have your own story and your own experience, rather than kind of a lead the witness kind of a thing, where you're living out your expectations. I would say also, don't think that you can't survive and thrive. It will always hurt, and it will always be a loss, but as well as breaking you, it can also make you. And yeah, I didn't have contact with other birth moms for like 3 years after I placed. And when I first went to my first support group, it was like an option I didn't know I had. I saw it modeled in other people post placement that they were happy. I saw it modeled that they had full lives. And it was like I didn't even know that was an option until I saw other birth moms doing it. Yeah, birth mom community, find other birth moms. That's huge. I would say talk about it. This is getting more into post placement advice, but I would say talk about it, write about it. Don't put it away. The only way out is through. You have to feel it to heal it. It's not going to go anywhere if you don't address it and if you don't allow it. Trust that process and surrender to it. And again, like through sharing it and writing it and inviting people into it, that is really processing as well. So I could go on and on probably to answer that question. But.
No, that's really amazing advice. I loved all of that. So we had a listener ask us this question, and I feel like you talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you have more thoughts, I know she'd probably love to hear more. So she asked, does the pain ever go away from placing?
No, 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 but that's okay. That's okay. I don't want to move on. Because where there's tremendous pain, there's tremendous love. And for me, it's a good trade. I accept. And like I said, it has its own wisdom and it knows what it's doing. And I need to not try to boss my psyche around or to boss my heart around, but to surrender to the wisdom that, that my emotions have. See the purpose in it, but know that it won't kill you. It feels like right after placement, and for some time after placement, it feels like you won't survive it. It feels like it's going to kill you, and it feels like it's always going to feel this way. That is the moment. That is the snapshot. That is not forever. You will survive it. You will grow from that moment.
What have you struggled with since placement, and what do you wish the others knew or understood about those struggles?
What have I struggled with post placement? Geez, man, closed adoption. Yeah, like, yeah, no, that, I mean, like I said, I really think it's barbaric. I think closed adoption is barbaric, and not just from the perspective of a birth mom, but like just imagine the abrupt separation for a brand new human when their familiarity is to this energy and this voice. And then it's completely gone. Imagine how disruptive that is. There is something unnatural about adoption. I 100% still choose my choice. And I advocate, people consider it as one of their many options, just have an awareness and a full education. But it's not natural. And I think it is traumatic. And I don't fully buy into the idea of the quote primal wound, which I know a lot of people have a problem with daring to say something like that, because I've just seen so many people have different experiences. I think for some people it is exactly that classic primal wound scenario, but for so many other people, they really don't identify with that. And we are just so individual. And even, I guess, as infants, we process differently and experience differently. So I don't think putting that on everyone is necessarily fair. However, I do think it is very likely there is some degree of trauma in that separation. And I think it's significantly lessened when there is a gradual transference and then a continual presence of that first, mother. And I also think, birth is trauma as well. Life on the planet is trauma. So I don't think that because it's traumatic, that means it's wrong. But I think it means be careful how you do it, be wise how you do it, be prudent how you do it. What have I struggled with post-placement? I mean, it's hard. Just everything about being a birth mom is really hard. Certainly more so in the beginning, I struggled with other people not understanding it, because that certainly happens. Like I said, more often than not, people are kind, even if they don't understand and they want to understand. But there have obviously been, experiences where people have said hurtful, unenlightened things, and that was really hard to take initially. My skin has gotten a lot thicker, but having something so personal and so sacred to me be misunderstood in the beginning was just like unbearable. Reunion has been the hardest thing I've done since placement, and that's kind of a whole other story. And just because placement was hard doesn't mean it wasn't right, and just because reunion is hard doesn't mean it isn't right. I've grown exponentially from both. I mean, they've been the two experiences that have, had the most pain and the most growth. There's gifts in both of those struggles. But the reason that reunion has been so, challenging and painful is that, so I'll try to briefly give the backstory here. So when he was 5 years old, his mom had a stroke, and she's been cognitively impaired ever since, and also had a lot of physical and medical issues. And so he essentially lost his mother. She's cognitively like a child. And I think, in his father's process, bless his heart, for going through that, and it really just wasn't what he signed up for. Having not been there, the best I can put it together is that he kind of checked out. And so it seems like my birth son was kind of left to his own resources and the internet, and missed out on a lot of parenting and modeling and training that would have come if his mom had still been there. And I say that without judgment, and with compassion, but with a little bit of frustration. But it is what it is. And the results of that are an adult who has a lot of unprocessed trauma, and who doesn't necessarily really know how to be an adult. He's incredibly intelligent, golden-hearted person, and just really struggles in the world. And so a lot of depression and tech addiction and some isolation, etc., a lot of loneliness, things like that. And so for those reasons, just to discover how very different his story was than the story I thought I was giving him, that has just been a heck of a thing to wrap my head around, not only just because I love this person more than my own life, more than any other person, and he is struggling. And that's just been, and then being his closest confidant through those struggles. So it's a lot of burden, a lot of emotions to process, but then also processing like this is the life that I gave him. Now I've got anger about that I've dealt with over the years, and hopefully, gained some ground on, and I've got some frustration and some confusion. But I think it amazes people that I still don't doubt my decision, even though his story has gone so very differently than what I thought it would be. I mean, I thought that I used to say all the time when I would speak and write for all those years, I would say, I gave him more, I gave him better. And I'll never speak those words again because I just can't say that with any confidence. But what I do still know is, because of the experiences that I had, when I chose adoption and when I met his parents, specifically when I met his parents, like that was second to meeting Justin, second to meeting my son and seeing him for the first time. Meeting his parents face to face was the most undeniable spiritual experience of my life. And so I still believe that my choice was right. I still believe I didn't give him necessarily better or more in terms of how we see those things, but what I gave him what was right for him. And I still have peace and confidence in that choice that God put him there. Now I've got some beef with God because I don't have access to the blueprints, and I don't have access to that wisdom. But in my better moments, I trust that wisdom, and I trust that God does have the blueprints. And my formative years were not ideal either, and they left a mark, and they left me with some handicaps that for my entire time on this planet will be my curriculum, that will be burden and obstacle to me that I work through and work on and gradually ascend. But in hindsight, those are the things that I've built my mission on. It has been my curriculum. And so in hindsight, from the perspective of this side of all the work I've done, I would not trade in those struggles. And I think he has that same opportunity. He can have those struggles and those injustices transformed and actually be for his benefit and the benefit of others when he is ready. That is an option to him, and it will be that redemption and transformation, in my experience, is so sweet that it compensates for all the bitterness. So that is the perspective that I believe and cling to, and that has definitely been the biggest struggle for me post placement, is just trying to figure out how to be, gosh, not even just a birth mom, but a mother to this person who has such maternal void, and has so much space to fill in a maternal sense, and trying to figure out like it's so bizarre and unexpected and so unique, and like there's not a manual for it. And yeah, so just trying to walk that path emotionally and logistically, and yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's heavy and really beautiful thoughts. Thank you for being so vulnerable. That's really hard.
Yeah. I take like when there would be things that would be published or recorded, I was hesitant about saying that much typically, but he never listens to or reads any of this stuff. So and I feel like I'm not being disrespectful because I'm not disclosing his identity or anything like that.
So, on that note, how has your relationship with Justin and his adoptive family evolved over time?
Wow. I mean, like I've had to grow. And things have had to shift. and it's just taught me so much, and really things have shifted so much. I'm still more invested in him than anything. He's still the most important thing in my life. But that looks differently than it used to, because the way that it looked initially was not sustainable. If he called me in crisis, I would go into crisis. And in that mode, I am not going to be a good support, or I'm not going to hold space well. I'm not going to speak wisdom if I'm in a state of terror. But it's some pretty scary stuff, and so I totally have grace for myself was my experience at the time. But it just isn't sustainable. And I found that I was ineffective in that state. And so I have just learned so much more surrender. Like, even, gosh, even if my worst nightmare is realized, like, I have walked through that in my mind time and time again when it has been a real prospect. And even if the worst happens, I have determined that I will be okay, and that I will forgive, and that I will be at peace. And I have found the presence of mind and the trust and the surrender to walk him through that scenario as well, which I think has been really beneficial for him. I think initially my calm felt like, and he would say, "Don't you even care?" And I think in his growing up, he kind of learned to see love as people freaking out, people being scared. And that's how he knew that he existed and that he mattered, was when people were afraid for him. But over time, and me being more calm and expressing love in a different way, and being more effective in a state of peace, I think he has learned to identify and recognize love in different forms. So things have shifted and evolved a lot. With his dad, initially I really just tiptoed around everything and cleared everything with him first. And of course, it's crystal clear to me now that he just trusted me 100% and was just so overjoyed to have someone else in the game. I mean, I've never seen adoptive parents throw the door wide open like that, and it makes perfect sense to me now that he was just like, "We're drowning in here, like, please help." And so I kind of got confidence in that, like, okay, I'm kind of running my own show here with Justin, and like, I kind of can't do wrong. And it's all going to be better. It's all going to be, improvement. It's all going to be a benefit. And it's actually come, kind of evolved to where I give his dad counsel and advice. And like, there have been times when we've really counseled together for Justin's best interest, and kind of leaned on each other's insights and experience. And really so much of my experiences working with adolescents in crisis over the years have prepared me really well for this relationship with Justin, and even with his dad. His mom, gosh, that woman, I just love her. I mean, like I said, cognitive, she's like a little kid, but she is love. And there's been twice when she has spoken to me through her broken brain, right from her heart. And she told me, "Thank you for giving him to me." And I said, "Debbie, he was yours." And she says, "We'll share him in heaven." And it's like, there's not usually that kind of clarity. Like, I'm telling you, like, anyway, and she's just goodness, and she always was. I mean, when I met her, I just was instantly in love with her, and I just instantly was her sister, and and then all those years of missing Justin, like, as much as I longed to be with Justin, I was like, let me just sit with my friend. Let me just go to lunch with my friend and like be in her life and have her in mine. And so that reunion was really sweet and really beautiful and really hard with his mom. And she just loves me. She loves having me around, and she gets so excited. And their home is open to me. Like, they've been so gracious. Like, whenever I'm anywhere near where they live, they always ask me to stay more days. And, so I'm really grateful for and how vulnerable they've been with me, to let me into their world and to not hide the dysfunction and the weaknesses, like I think so many people would be inclined to do. Because as burdensome as it is, as painful it is, as disappointing as so many aspects of it are, like, I would I would have that any day over going back to not knowing and wondering, and I have influence, and I would take that any day over not knowing each other.
So, is there any advice that you would give to adoptees and birth parents, either one, who are searching for each other, trying to find reunification?
Yeah, so I actually worked for a year in adoption reunification, doing the search work and kind of helping people navigate, the relationship and kind of opening that door. And I curated an ebook actually, comprised of stories from adoptive parents, adoptees, and birth parents who had been through adoption reunions. And so I actually have a lot to say on that. I mean, obviously I have a lot to say on everything, but advice that I would give, I would say, okay, for me, I think I had a premonition, for lack of a better word, that maybe what I found on the other side of that door might be hard to take. Because before I knew the difficulty that was just around the corner, I had a really intentional determination and mantra that no matter what I found, I would love no matter what. That was my mantra as I approached adoption reunion. Love no matter what. And when I get off track, I can recenter myself towards that. I can check myself against it. And so I would recommend that. Be prepared to go in with grace, and go in with surrender, and go in with acceptance. Now, the majority of people who seek reunion have a positive experience, but I know lots of people who have had incredibly heartbreaking experiences. But I would say that even those folks, most of the time, are glad that they tried because now they know rather than wondering. Yeah, I would say be in a place with your own stuff where it's not going to be burdensome to the other party. Particularly as a birth mom, as I was approaching reunion, I really just needed Justin to know from the get-go that he did not need to fix me or heal me or fill my wounds or fill my voids. And I told him in our very first conversation, this relationship will be what you need it to be. And I didn't want to put anything on him. And I've known adoptees who felt put upon or obligated by their birth parents. And it makes sense because particularly people who closed, even before I did, when things were so much darker and like you weren't even allowed to process, and people were told to keep secrets and hide. It makes all the sense in the world that people have these gaping wounds and then reunion is like the balm, the salve. But just to be really careful to not transfer that to this other person and to make sure, we can subtly objectify people if we're not careful when we're in pain. So I would say that one for sure. Don't expect it to fix anything, or to fix everything, I would say. And when it does, just be grateful, let's see, come what may and love it is something that really comes to mind. That was another thing that I just determined that I would have gratitude no matter what I found. I was determined that I would be grateful. Before I opened that door, that was the pep talk I'm giving myself. Whatever there is, you will be grateful for it. And I found that we can be grateful, like whatever the circumstances. Let's see. I think there's just so much fear on both sides. I've seen a lot of standoffs. There's been so many times when both parties are just waiting for the other party to open the door. And so I would say have the courage to make that move because both parties often feel it's not my place. I'll wait for them. I don't want to put them out. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. Like I said, I know people who have experienced rejection. And that is so, so painful. And I would say, no, that's a possibility on both ends. Hope for the best and be prepared for the worst.
All right. Well, that was great. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Oh, 1,000 things, I'm sure. Like I always have so much to say on this topic. I've been really involved in the adoption community for the last 23 years. And so I've watched it grow into being a community, which was something that really wasn't there at first, and a lot of really beautiful things. And I've watched things shift. And I think we live in a larger culture that we really just like to divide and subdivide and subdivide and subdivide. And I've seen a lot of division in the adoption community over differences in people's experiences and perspectives. And that has been something that's really hurt to watch. And part of the reason I think I've withdrawn. Let me tell you, the sweetest associations, have been with people who have this unique and incredibly personal experience in common with me, and not just adoptive parents, but I'm sorry, not just birth parents, but also adoptive parents and adoptees. There's this knowing, and there's this thing that we share, and when I've been united, particularly in service with people from other people from the adoption triad, but also just how healing it's been to connect with those people. And across, I mean, in the beginning, we were so much better at connecting with each other across those lines of differences in our experiences. And so I would say, listen without judgment, listen without thinking that and don't think that anyone else's narrative is a commentary on your narrative. It isn't. And someone else's joy is not your pain. Someone else's gain is not your loss. And someone else's loss doesn't take from your gain. Someone's pain doesn't take from your joy. My dream is to see again a really integrated, diverse, unified, supportive, loving adoption community, because it was magic. It was magic for all of us. Just added so much sweetness. So yeah, I would say for people who are in the adoption world, and also, like I said, when you're doing your research, recognize that echo chambers exist, and make sure you check out all the different echo chambers to get a real perspective, rather than just landing on one and going, oh, that's what adoption is. So
that's beautiful. Such great advice. I've definitely seen some of that divide as well. And that's really well said. Just trying to be open to listening and hearing all of these different experiences. I love that so much. But thank you so much, Tamra. You are so wise, and I really loved hearing your story.
Thank you, Lynette. Thanks for the opportunity. I love telling my story, and I don't get as many opportunities as I used to. So it's good for me. So thank you for that. It was great to connect with you.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Open Adoption Project. We want to thank Tamra again for sharing her story with us, and for really sharing all of the things that she's learned over most of her life as a birth mom. If you're interested in following Tamra on social media, she's on Instagram at RamblinTam, and we will put that in the show notes for today's episode. Again, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.